I want to talk about brakes tonight. Brakes are the most important part of the car. You know, I wrote that line 40 years ago, 45 years ago, I think, when I was writing an article for MG Magazine by John Dugdale. It was printed by British Leyland. It was that long ago. Brakes, doesn't matter how fast your car goes, and it doesn't matter how nice it looks if it can't stop. Brakes have got to be at the top of your list for all maintenance and all repair. So how do you know if your brakes are bad? Well, should you take a look? Well, maybe in the springtime when you get your car out and you're starting to drive. Although for David from Sydney, I guess that's next fall. And anyway, when you get your car out to drive, you can always look in the brake master cylinder and see if there's any fluid in it, or if the fluid's gone down precipitously. You got to put a lot of fluid into it. It's like, where did that go? People call me up and they say, "Oh, my brake master cylinder is like empty, but there's not a drop of brake fluid on the ground. Where did it go?" And it's like, it's in your carpet. It leaks out of the master cylinder. If it's not on the ground, it's in your carpeting. And if it's just a little drip that drips every, like once every couple of days, it gets into the carpeting, and you might not even notice that it's in there. But it doesn't just evaporate. It can't evaporate. It's got to go someplace. It either goes into the cylinders from use, but most of us don't use our cars that much to chew up a lot of brake fluid, as the pads wear and as the shoes wear and so forth. So that means that it's leaking. The other thing is when you go out to drive your car and you come to an emergency stop. I mean, you're out on the road, there's no other cars around, and you put your hands around the steering wheel so you can grab the wheel if it starts to move, and you do a couple practice brakes, brake pretty hard, and if the steering wheel turns out of your hand, like you're turning left or you're turning right, the steering wheel turns out of your hand, that means that there's something wrong with the rear brakes, and one side is grabbing sooner or more than the other side. If, on the other hand, you got your hands here and you hit the brakes pretty hard and the car drifts to the right or drifts to the left, that means that there's something going on with your rear brakes. Okay. Then, once you're sure that the brakes are pretty good, then you take it up to 50 miles an hour or something and step on the brakes like a kid rolled out in front of you in a wheelchair. You've got to do an emergency stop and just jam on the brakes. All four brakes should lock up.
John, I believe you said rear twice.
Oh boy, I cannot hear you. I've got a real bad.
What he's saying, John, is you said when it yanks to the left or right rear, and when it drifts to the left or right rear, and I don't think that's what you meant. So
No,
try that again.
I meant front. Thank you. When the steering wheel rips out of your hand and steers, that's the front brakes, front brake hoses. Almost always. Thank you, Judd, for being able to understand that. Thanks very much, Jordan, for coming in. So if the car drifts to the right or drifts to the left, that's the rear brakes. Now, when you jam on the brakes, no one brake should come on before the other one. It's especially true with drum brakes. Well, we all have drum brakes in the back except the twin cams. If you jam on the brakes and all of a sudden one of the rear brakes just grabs and goes into a full skid before some of the other brakes start to shut down, before they lock up, that's because you've got goo, brake fluid or oil, rear axle oil on the rear brake shoes. It's counterintuitive. You'd think, oh, well, geez, I mean, if there's oil on the brake shoes, wouldn't they slip? Isn't it the other side that's grabbing? No, it's the other way around. The oil makes the brake shoes absolutely jam against the drum, and the wheel comes to a stop. So you can get that on drum cars. You can get that on all four corners. But on discs don't act like that. It's just the drums that will jam up real quick, and you just know something's wrong. So because one of them comes goes into a skid well before your car's starting to slow down. So what should happen, of course, is the car stops relatively straightly and all wheels lock up at the same time. Inherently, there's no difference between drum brakes and disc brakes. They both work wonderfully well. For those people who spend all the time and money to put disc brakes on their TD, TF, MGA, it really isn't necessary. It's disc brakes. The function of the brakes is to turn motion into heat, and it does it quite well. But for you to get the brake drums so hot that it doesn't want to brake because the brake fluid is boiling, a dangerous situation. There's just nobody drives there. If you're out on the track, you drive like that, and you've made accommodation for it. But around town, you can't. You'd have to do 15 0 to 60 to stop, 0 to 60 to stop, 0 to 60 to stop, repeatedly to start to boil the brake fluid, like in an MGA or a T-type. Well, let's take the T-type up to 40 and then stop. It's very, very difficult to boil brake fluid. Yes.
I can go 65, 70 and hit that panic stop.
But
Will you go back to if you've got that rear brake drum that's got some fluid on it? Can you clean it, or do you have to throw that shoe away?
you got to throw the shoe away. It's real sad. It's just you cannot clean brake fluid out. So if you've got if you're in the repair section now, when we're taking a look at the rear brakes, and one side's got grease all over it, and you soak it in gasoline. You soak it in carb cleaner. You spray it off. Wife isn't home. You put it in the dishwasher. You wash it a couple of times. Still, you wait a while, and that oil will ooze back out onto the surface of the shoe. Brakes are so important. You don't want to fool around. You're in a jam. You can't get any more shoes. They're out of stock. Nobody will send them to you. You got to get back on the road. Switch them. So you got one crappy one on one side, or two crappy ones. Oh, what am I trying to say? Separate them. So you've got an oily one on each side and a good one on each side, so that the braking doesn't get mismatched. We've done that. We've done that before. You have to do it sometimes, but you just can't get oil or brake fluid out of the brake lining. And it's the coefficient of sliding friction between the brake lining and the steel drum that turns that motion into heat. So there's all different types of brake pads. We'll talk about some of that in just a moment. But that's the way to find out if your brakes are good. They don't.
John,
Yes.
my dad once told me, if you want to figure out which wheel's not working right, find a gravel road or a dirt road, then slam on your brakes and look at your skid marks.
Sure. Yep. That'll do it too. Sometimes, all you hear something, and you go, well, geez, was it the left or the right? But whenever you repair brakes, you don't just do that side. You do the whole rear axle, or you do the whole front end. You do them always equally. So if you can tell if it's front or rear, you're going to end up doing both sides anyway. But yeah, that's a nice way to do it. Some people have someone drive beside them, but now we got 2 people, 3 people involved. We got all the kinds of chances for a collision. Isn't a safe way. It's like hanging on the underside of a truck to watch the drive shaft and see what the problem is. Well, the truck's moving. It's like, no, huh? Come up with some other way to do it. So anyway, your brakes on your MG do not feel the same. Well, maybe 785 through 80, but the earlier ones do not feel the same as they do in your Equinox. They just don't. People call me up and say, geez, my brakes, I got to press pretty hard on the pedal to get the car to stop. And I say, can you lock up all 4 brakes? Yep. I said, well, then it's okay. Now, there are different types of shoes, and there are different types of linings. And about those, I am not skilled to speak very much about those, because there's all different coefficients of sliding friction. And there are some pads that don't work until they start to get pretty hot. Then they work pretty well, but if they're cold, they don't work. I think those are the green pads, but I don't want to say that for sure because I don't know. You can rebuild the brake master cylinder. You can take that apart. You can buy a kit for it. On the earlier MGBs and the MGAs, you can do it in place. You don't have to take the cylinder out. You might run a hone, a dingleberry brush down through the bore, clean it out. But then you got to look at the bottom of the bore, and if it's all eroded away, rusted away from the water that's separated from the brake fluid, sat on the bottom and caused rust. If it's eroded, better to get a new master cylinder or to get yours re-sleeved. Some of the new master cylinders look like they're from a Japanese car or something with a little tiny reservoir. They don't look right. So you've always got these two competing themes, form and function. If you want it to look right, you've got to take your original one and get it re-sleeved. Just offhand, you take a 1967 MGB master cylinder with that can on it and you get it re-sleeved by White Post Restoration. I bet you got the better part of $300 into it. Is it worth it? Well, that's up to you. You can buy a new one. Sometimes you can buy brake cylinders that look like the original ones. That's nice. My gut on this is that, when we're buying soft tops, headlight rings, engine parts, they can be messed up. Sometimes the manufacturer orders a bunch of stuff that comes in. They don't have a way to check it. They begin selling it. It's faulty. We all know this. We all have our complaints. But they don't do that with brake parts. Brakes are one lawyer away from serious money. So I don't think anyone fools around with brake parts. Anyway, therefore I think all the brake parts that you buy are safe, good quality. So you got form and function. You can either spend $200 on a master cylinder that looks like it came out of your car originally, or you can get the thing for $28 that looks like it came out of a stick shift Toyota. I prefer to re-sleeve. That's my go-to. But anyway, sometimes you can rebuild the master cylinders in place. You can always rebuild the front brake calipers. You take them apart. I know, in the workshop manual, in bold print, do not separate caliper halves, spelled with 2 L's often. Do not separate caliper halves. Well, you can't rebuild it without separating them. Of course you got to separate them. Just torque them down 60 pounds or so, put some Loctite on them when you put them back together, and there's a square O-ring that sits between the caliper halves. 17H 7649, something like that. Moss sells it. Everybody sells it. You can cheat and get a round cross-section O-ring and put it in there if you've got the things apart and you need to put it back together. Anyway, just be very cautious. So I always rebuild front brake calipers. You can buy kits that have got stainless steel pistons and the seals. Just be careful, they're great. Rear brake cylinders, you always buy new ones on MGBs. You just buy new ones, they're so inexpensive. Just do it. We used to rebuild them on the car, didn't even take them off. Take the pistons, heat them up with a torch if you had to. Get the piston out, run the hone through it, put the seals on it, put it back together. But so many of them have got so much rust and pitting in them now from the water that's in the brake fluid that is just changing. And you get a bigger bleeder. It's a nicer bleeder. That original bleeder took a 5/32 wrench or something. It was impossible to get a wrench on. And the new ones are 7mm, I think. A lot nicer. The aluminum cylinders on the earlier cars, on the MGA 6, the T-types, the TDs, TFs, MGAs, those cylinders, you can get apart, you can hone them, you can put new seals in them. It's cost effective. If you can't get the piston out of the cylinder, then heat it up with your propane torch, drop it into a 5-gallon pail of water. It'll quench it. It'll pull the steel away from the aluminum. But those cylinder walls have to be absolutely smooth. They can't have any pitting in them at all. A little bit of oversize isn't going to hurt, but you got to be cautious. I want to say a couple words about silicone brake fluid. Again, we've got form and we've got function. The function of the brake fluid is the same as any other brake fluid. It's no better, no worse. The advantage to silicone brake fluid is it does not eat paint. Oh my gosh. So if you've got an MGA with a master cylinder up there, an MGB with a master cylinder up in the corner, and every time you put brake fluid in, it spills a little tiny bit of brake fluid out. It oozes out. You make a mistake, you fill up the master cylinder, and then you push the caliper pistons back, and it squirts all this brake fluid back out of the master cylinder all over your under bonnet area. If you want to protect your under bonnet, use silicone fluid. Silicone fluid expands the rubber seals incrementally, just a tiny, tiny bit. That causes a problem in the MGA and dual master cylinders. It causes a problem in those, not always, sometimes. It's easily avoided by allowing the master cylinder piston to come a little farther forward. Chuck it up on a lathe and take a 1/16 of an inch off the piston, or put an extra thick gasket, which is the cheaper way, on the front of the master cylinder so the piston can come farther forward and hit the metal plate on that cylinder. If you want to know some more about it, call me tomorrow, email me tomorrow. But it just has to do with the original seal expanding incrementally and closing off a necessary, essential drilling from the reservoir into the master cylinder reservoir. And once you cut that off, then the brakes will come on by themselves. They can come on by themselves. And you end up with a car absolutely locked, stopped, immovable, as though you were pressing the brakes as hard as you could, and it won't recover until it either cools down or you crack a bleeder open. If you carry a bleeder wrench with you, that you can just stop every time that happens and bleed it off. Easier to put the spacer on the front of it. So let me see what else there is here. Brake fluid loss, creeping pedal. How do you know if your master cylinder is good or not? The master cylinder is a hydraulic unit, and it leaks. It'll leak externally. If it leaks externally, you know it's bad. But it can also leak internally, meaning you can put your foot on the pedal and you can't develop enough pressure because fluid's going around the primary cup. In those cases, if you put light pressure on the master cylinder, just really light pressure on the pedal, light, and it sinks, the master cylinder is faulty. You can sometimes, with a faulty master cylinder, jam the pedal so hard that the internal seal, the seal on the master cylinder, opens up because of the pressure and holds. But under gentle use, it doesn't hold. So anytime there's a problem with a creeping pedal, oh my gosh, you want to take care of that by replacing or rebuilding the master cylinder. The handbrake is just that. It's a handbrake. It's not an emergency brake. It's used in the earlier ones, the MGAs and before, are fly-off handles. So you can actually pull up on the brake handle and slow the car down while you're still able to steer it. This is for gymkhanas and competition work, stuff like that. Because if you put your brakes on and the wheels are on an angle, all they do is they can skid. They can skid very, very easily because they're no longer turning. So by using the fly-off handle on the TC, TD, TF, and MGAs, you can still steer the car while you're hand braking it. But most of us would use the handbrake only when we're parked. And it's always a good idea. It's always a good idea to turn your wheels in towards the curb. Nobody does that anymore, but we've got MGs, and if the handbrake lets loose and you're not in gear, oh boy, the car can go someplace. So handbrakes, foot brakes, stopping in a straight line. Craig Peck he was the founder of the Emerald Necklace MG Register. He and I have been friends for a better part of 50 years almost now. He was working for Eveready Battery, and they had somebody come from the federal government to give a couple of instructions to a couple of employees who would then in turn instructed the rest of the workforce. And Craig said they went out in a car. This is all of 20 years ago. And he said there was a woman driver, and she said, we're going to go out and in this giant parking lot, and you're going to go up to 60 miles an hour, and you're going to jam on the brakes. Just lock them up. Don't give it any faltering at all. Hit the brakes as hard as you can. And Craig said, we went out and I jammed on the brakes, and the car, as this braking turns sideways, and I don't know if it ends up going backwards or whatever. And I guess there was a point at which she asked you to do that, to hit the brakes. And then there was a number of feet that it took to stop the car. Then she kicked on the ABS brakes. The car stayed absolutely straight and stopped in like 2/3 of the distance. So ABS brakes are absolutely great. We don't have ABS brakes on our car. They are old-fashioned brakes, and sometimes you have to steer a little bit while you're braking hard to account for the movement in the wheel, because one is grabbing better than the other. So anyway, that's my little bit on brakes, but I'm happy to entertain any questions, or we can share some information.
John, talk about the clevis pins and wear.
Okay, so on the brake and clutch pedal, there are clevis pins, to hook the pedal to the fork that goes into the master cylinders, and those pins will get so worn. Not so much the brake one as the clutch one, because the clutch one, you're moving the pedal the whole way all the time. The brake, you're just moving a little bit. But those clevis pins can and do wear dramatically. I've got some that look like they shouldn't even hold the pedal anymore. And the pedals and the forks that go around the pedal, they all get, the holes in there get elongated. So what that means is the pedal moves a distance before something starts to happen. So in some of the cars, that makes a difference. But yeah, this feeling the brake pedal free play is always important. You should have 1/2 inch, that's not much, 1/2 inch of pedal free play before the pedal begins to push the piston into the master cylinder on both the brakes and the clutch.
Hey, John, this is Judd.
Yeah.
I just happened to notice on the one of the recent Moss catalogs has on the front a special deal on the flexible hoses, brake hoses that go from the solid steel or whatever to the wheel that has to be able to move. You might mention that on my TD, I'm sure that the hose was probably, if not original, at least back to the 70s.
Oh my.
The problem is that, of course, I could apply brakes. They work fine. But I couldn't unapply brakes because the fluid couldn't just flow backwards. And that might be a part that people might overlook. It's a cheap, easy fix. And if you're going to do the brakes, I would recommend if you don't know how old they are, replace them.
So the rule, my rule of thumb now is that every 10 years, you got to have new hoses on your hood, because as Judd said, the hole in the hose collapses. And you can get hundreds of, I calculated once, I don't remember what the pressure is in the circuit, if it's hundreds or thousands of pounds, but you can push fluid through that hose But if it goes at different rates, if it goes into the left front sooner or more than the right front, then the car is going to turn to the left. That's when the steering wheel turns out of your hand. And it's always brake hoses. It's not the calipers, it's the hoses. So in the same thing with the clutch, not talking about the clutch tonight, but you can press the clutch and then you let the clutch go and you hear that fluid get sucked back up through the hose. So yeah, those hoses can and do go bad. 10 years is my rule of thumb on how long they ought to be on there. There are two different types of hoses. There are the original hoses, and there are the new little tiny thin. They don't look as strong, except they're coated with like a stainless steel mesh. So if you watch the brakes working, if you're underneath and somebody's hitting the pedal, you're bleeding the brake, and you say, well, just go ahead and try it a couple of times. As they apply the brake, you'll see the brake hose move. Not much, it moves. If it moves, that means that the pedal is moving also to cause the brake hose to move. These newer hoses don't flex as much as that. All the race cars use them, of course. But it's not necessary. It's better. It's better. You get a firmer pedal. That's the truth. I didn't talk about pedals, off on another tangent here. So you can have a long stroke, but when you get to the bottom of the stroke, it's like absolutely firm, hard as a rock. Takes a long time to get there, but then it goes hard as a rock. But if it's sort of squishy and never really, there's not a definition of between when it's like really hard and really soft. That's the difference between either having air in the lines in the latter case, or the brakes being way out of adjustment in the former case. That's why Glenn called me today about brake adjustment. On the TDs, TFs, MGAs, those drums have been to the machine shop a couple of times, and they are larger in diameter than they were intended to be. Additionally, who knows how long the brake cylinders are? They're made to specification, but if they're made a little short, then you got to take up account for that in the adjuster. If the brake shoes are not lined as thickly as the original shoes, are they or not? Are they not? Who knows? But if they're not lined as thickly as the original shoes, then you got to click the adjuster on those early Micram adjusters. That's the T-type TD through MGA 1500 in the rear and the MGAs all the way through. You got to adjust those Micram adjusters. And sometimes you run out of adjustment. So Moss has got a part 180-228M. M stands for mask, I guess. And you can get these little tiny pieces of metal. I got a whole box of them. And you put them underneath the adjuster, makes the adjuster just a little bit taller. But you got to weld them. So it's not an easy schmeezy test. You can't glue them. You can't let them lie in there loose. That isn't a good idea. They'll come loose sometime and start scraping someplace, fall into the brakes. That's always a bad idea. They got to be welded, so it's not just a buy it off the shelf item. We've made those for years and years. Anyway, Judd, thank you very much. You talked about the brake hoses, 10 years, two types of hoses. Okay.
John?
Yes.
I have a question about the 1/2-inch free travel.
Yes.
Is that at the pedal?
At the pedal.
At the pedal.
The pedal, because you got a 6 or 7 to 1 relationship between the length of the levers here. The pedal's like way down here, and it only moves up here. So yeah.
What's the best way to do that? By hand or your foot?
By your index finger. You can't feel it with your foot.
Okay.
Yeah, just feel it, and it just tongue. You can. It's just as distinct. So the later MGBs and MGCs and midgets, 68 onwards, are controlled. That free play is controlled by the brake light switch. On the MGB 62 through 67, it's controlled by nothing. It's by the wear that's in in the fork and in the clevis pin and the pedal. You don't get to adjust that. And then in the MGAs, it's adjusted by the length of the push rod, and same thing on the T-types, the length of the push rod. But sometimes it's laborious. You got to go and you feel it, and you go, yeah. You unscrew the push rod or the brake light switch, and you go to feel it, and there's no pedal free play, and you go, damn, I went too far. That's why you always count how many turns you do it and stuff.
Yeah,
So
I had mine too tight and the brake light stayed on all the time.
Okay, and the brakes come on.
Of course.
Come on. So that's somebody will call me and say, damn, I got back to my house and my brakes were just smoking. They weren't stuck in the road, just smoking. And it's just so hot. What's going on? I said, what have you done recently? Well, I changed the brake light switch. Like, okay, there you go.
What kind of car are you talking about there, John? I mean, the brake light switch on the TD or the T series, and I think the MGA, but I'm not positive. Is there a pressure switch that's way down there underneath the chassis of the car? And by the way,
Way down.
Napa makes a perfectly good replacement for that.
Yes. Okay, so all the cars up through 1968 had a pressure switch. And then it must be the government. They didn't just decide. I'm sure the government said, no, you can't do that. So now we have a mechanical switch. So as soon as you start to move the pedal, the brake, not when the brakes come on, but when you start to move the pedal. And I talked to a guy not too long ago who put an MGB brake light switch on his MGA. He said, I'm terrified of the people behind me and I don't want to wait. And besides, those pressure switches can and do go bad a lot. So as Judd said, you can buy one at Napa. It fits everything, Morris Minors and Spitfires, and fits with some American cars too, or Napa wouldn't have such a number of them, but they fit all the British cars. It's a British standard pipe thread on the bottom of it, some interference, you screw it in. And if you're careful when you're changing them, you don't even have to bleed the brakes afterwards. You got to have all your ducks in a row and do the switching real fast. And it's nice to have somebody up on the master cylinder with their finger on the pedal, not their foot, just their finger on the pedal. And you spin that old switch out. You can say okay, and they press as slowly as they can press, which is pushing the fluid out of the fitting, and then you screw the new fitting in. Those go bad a lot. I swear silicone fluid makes those brake pressure light switches fail a whole lot faster than real fluid does. But that's just my gut. Never done a study on it. I'll have to wait for Fred. Fred's the one who does all those studies.
Never had a problem with the silicone with those switches.
What's that, Fred?
I never had problems with silicone with those switches.
Okay, all right. Well, as I said, it's just gut, So, Richard.
John?
Yes.
Richard Pittenger here. My 80B has a vacuum booster.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's considered power brakes or what. It still takes quite a bit of effort to brake the car. I'm just wondering, is there any service, any checks I could make on that? Could you talk about that part of the system a little bit?
Sure. So from 1975 to 1980, they put a power assist. They are power brakes. There's two different types of increasing the brake fluid pressure compared to your foot. One is to have your foot press something that in turn presses the master cylinder harder, which is what the case is here. The other way, which was done on the MGBs up through 67 and Healy's, MGCs have got two brake boosters. Oh my gosh, there's $2,000 or something. And that takes the brake fluid pressure that comes out of the master cylinder and amplifies it and increases it and sends it. But both of them, both systems, you would consider power brakes. servo assist, whatever there's lots of different names, but they're both power brakes. So you can tell on a 75 to an 80 if your brakes are working by moving the pedal, and you get a feel for how much movement you've got. Turn the car off, so the engine comes to rest, and continue to push the pedal another dozen times, and after about 6 times, all the vacuum's gone, and suddenly the pedal becomes much, much harder to press, or it doesn't move quite as far. It's not as squishy, and it doesn't move as far. If you meet that condition, then your power brakes are working. And then I got to go back to my earlier comment that they don't work like your 2017 Chevy Equinox. They aren't that good. The other thing that power brakes will do is hiss. They'll either hiss all the time, and you can either hear it, or the car runs crummy because the hiss is air entering the system, going through the tube and then into the intake manifold, where it's only branched into the 3rd and 4th cylinders. Because of that, if you have an air leak at idle, a hiss, sucking air in, it's leaning out the mixture to 3 and 4. And if you get a single Stromberg on your car or something, then it's misfiring on 3 or 4. You can hear that hiss with a listening tube, or you can take spray carburetor cleaner and spray it between the master cylinder and the servo. Or, well, that's about the only place you can squeeze it. Or you can take a pair of pliers and squeeze the vacuum hose that goes between the servo and the intake manifold. If that slows the car down when it's sitting there idle, then it's leaking because you've stopped the leak going in there. It should not make one iota of difference if you squeeze that brake hose or not. Always bothers me to squeeze a vacuum hose or brake hose. They're tools, probably available from Snap-on with these pretty flat surfaces, and you can squeeze a brake hose, but it just seems like you're taking the inside and corrupting the inside of the hose. I hate to squeeze a hose, but if you're doing diagnostics and you have to do it, it'll recover. So that's it with the power brakes. It's either they're, when they're working, the brakes feel kind of squishy. When you turn the car off and you lose the vacuum after a couple of strokes of the pedal, then the pedal gets real hard. So if it'll do that, Richard, then they're working the way they're supposed to.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
John, I was driving my B today pretty hard up in the mountains. It does not have a vacuum assist. And are the cars that have the vacuum assist, do they need it? Can you just take it away and plug up that vacuum?
No, you can't plug up the vacuum. That's like taking the vacuum servos off an MGC. You need a leg about that round. Press the pedal hard enough.
Okay.
So the master cylinder bore on the 75 through 80s isn't an inch, but it's really big compared to the 5/8 of an inch or whatever it is on the 68 through 74s. So
it would get a whole lot more complexity than just disconnected.
So you can take the whole brake system from a 75 through 80 and put it on your 73, and you can take the master cylinders, the master cylinder box, pedals, etc., from your 73 and put it on your 80. So they are interchangeable. You can't just knock off the vacuum. In the earlier style, well, you still can't knock off the vacuum because yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention the shuttle switch, that brass device that lies down the left inner fender. It's on the right-hand side on an MGC. That is not a proportioning valve. Everybody looks at it and goes, "Oh, it's a proportioning valve," because other cars do have proportioning valves. We don't. It's just a shuttle. It's got a piston inside it that if there's a difference in brake pressure between the front and rear circuits, it slides and grounds out a switch, which then illuminates a light on your dashboard that says brakes. Well, it didn't for a while. 77 to 80, it says brakes. Prior to that, it's just a red light at the top left of your dash. To warn you, if you didn't already know that there's a problem because your foot's on the floor when you have to hit the brakes, that you got this warning sign. So
I call that you're gonna die light.
what's
Is-
that?
Said I call that you're going to die light.
You're going to die light. All right. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned, the brake hoses, they don't go gradually. So if you're gonna drive your car, maybe carry a brake hose with you. That happened to us up in Washington. All of a sudden, the brake was hanging up, and fortunately, we pull over the side of the road and replace the brake hose right there, and nobody stopped to help. There was not one MG owner in sight, but yeah, I always carry extra hoses because they don't go gradually.
Okay.
Yeah, something to
John.
think about. Something to think about too is on the shuttle switch.
Yeah.
If the seals on that shuttle are bad, it's going to leak out of the warning switch because it's not sealed.
Right.
So a lot of people put a bolt in there and they just don't care about the light. The misnomer is that if that shuttle slides to one side, it turns off that circuit. It does not. All it does is move the shuttle back and forth. The fluid still goes out that hole and to wherever it's leaking. But the nice thing is it's a dual reservoir, so you only lose fluid out of half the circuit, and the other circuit's still working just fine. So people think, oh, I'm gonna die because my brakes aren't working. Well, no, half your circuits are still working. You still have some brakes. Just be cautious, and you can get it home and you can fix it.
The rule of thumb is that it's always the rear brakes that leak. That was our most common repair at University Motors was rear brakes. Do a complete lube. You take the drums off the back. They're sopping wet. You just replace everything, the seals, the shoes, the cylinders, everything, just everything, put everything back in there nice and clean and powder dry. 2/3 of the braking in the car is done in the front. 1/3 is done in back. If you lose your front brakes, you know it. You know
Well,
it.
that's the funny thing is a friend of mine had a MGB set up for SCCA racing, and he had the SPAC shocks on the front. Well, the brake hoses were rubbing against the SPAC shocks because they're mounted on the rear side of the A-arms, and one of those hoses broke, and of course you lose your brakes in the front all of a sudden.
All of a sudden, we had the same thing happen with those dreadful add-on shocks, the Armstrong shocks in the front of your car, just fine. There's nothing wrong with those at all. Just keep them there. We had somebody, they had brackets, and there's a lot of force up there when you get a full compression and a rebound and you're driving. This guy was in a parking lot, and a shock broke and went underneath the brake line, and then went up and just rent the hose asunder. It was in two pieces, and of course he had no brakes. Yep. More brake questions.
John, on your adjusters, you were talking about buying that one piece from Moss and their
Yes.
extender to put on. The best thing to weld those in is a spot welder. They fit right in between, put it in 3 spots. They should hold up. On the master cylinders, you were talking about them leaking and stuff. I had one go out in my 58. I pulled it. You know how much fun it is to get the back one off. I went ahead and rebuilt the master cylinder, put it back in, hooked everything, bled everything, pushed down the brake pedal, and lo and behold, it's going down. So I look over there and I got a little bit of brake fluid on the shelf. I take the master cylinder off. I go ahead, figuring out I screwed up, rebuild it, put it back in, leaked again. This time I was smart. I put my hand underneath there and had the wife put the pedal down, and I'm feeling the the fluid come out from around the the part that you adjust for your brakes and your clutch. And what it was that cap that went over the master cylinder. It was cupped. So you went ahead and I sanded it down flat on a piece, worked like a gem. On the brake linings, I checked with a couple manufacturers around here about having them go ahead and reline my brake shoes that I've got on there.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be a pretty good deal, especially if I can get them in the right form instead of with the leading edge like Moss has. Turned out to be $365 a pair. So that was not a one that I wanted to do. You were talking about the brake fluid boiling. What about brake fade?
Well, brake fade is from when they're getting too hot, right? It boils and you got bubbles and not boiling fluid. The other thing is that the brake shoes and brake pads work in a certain temperature range. And if they start to get too hot, some of them work better when they're hotter. Some of them work better when they're colder. But brake fade can be, you can't create the friction.
Yeah, that's caused by a vapor that comes off the brake linings.
Okay. So anyway, thank you.
No, thank you.
I've heard issues with a lot of the replacement shoes are not formed correctly. Can you talk about shaping the shoes to your drums?
Well, shoes are made probably under some sort of tight factory tolerances, but that has nothing to do with whether they match the radius of your brake drum. So there are two ways to do this. One is to draw X's with a magic marker on your brake shoe and put the drums on and go out and do some heavy duty stops and come back and see where the X's have been worn away and where the X's still remain. And where they've worn away, you can take some sandpaper and sand down the shoes yourself so that you're getting full contact in the end. Or you can just wait. You can wait. Within a couple 100 miles, the brakes bed in. That's they wear in. If you spend the $325, like John Turshak had fascinated about it, they will take your shoes and match them to your drums so that the radius is the same and you got full contact. Is that what you want me to talk about?
Okay. Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
This
Tom.
is Tom Gunderson. How are you? Since y'all talking about brakes, I have to pump my brake before I get the pedal to come up hard.
Okay.
And it has no problem stopping after that, but I have to pump it about 3 or 4 times before it really comes up hard. Nothing's leaking. You know.
All right, so it's one of two conditions. Either there's still some air left in the line, and you're pumping and making these bubbles smaller, or more possibly you're out of adjustment. You got a drum MGA behind you there. You got.
Yeah, that's what I've been working on. That's the one that got burned.
Okay, so you take the screwdriver and you put it in that micram adjuster.
Yeah.
And you put a pair of vice grips on the screwdriver so you can turn it, because you're trying to turn the screwdriver and you get it all the way tight and you try to take it back off 1 click and it jumps 3 clicks. But with a vice grips on your screwdriver, you can control it. and tighten it
Okay,
till it locks, tight, and then back it off a click. Does it run free? Back it off a click. Theoretically, the distance between fully locked and fully free is one click. If the brakes are new, it might be a couple clicks. And
well,
they-
they're not brand new, but
No, but you got a couple hundred miles on them.
yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay,
So
I'll
just-
do that. Thank you.
Yeah, just tighten them up and just see what a difference that makes.
Thank-
Hey, John, I had a question about the brake lines, about when do you know it's time to replace them? And you said something earlier about some of them being some sort of a British thread.
Okay, so what you got two 70s
I
MGBs.
got a 67 and a 74.
Yeah,
So
so those,
74, I'm rebuilding it right now.
all right, so the brake lines, the flexible lines, it's all American thread on those, no problem there. It was just the pressure brake switch, prior to 67 on all the cars, uses a British pipe. That was where the British thing came from. Then the hoses on your car, how do you know when to change them when they're 10 years old or older? That's it. And then
The metal lines?
what's that?
The metal lines?
The metal ones don't go bad.
Okay, that's what, mine are looking pretty nasty. I was just kind
Well,
of concerned that, is there some point that they need to be changed?
They rust from the outside in. And I mean, if it's too creepy, I mean, if it looks like you go, oh my gosh, well, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. And now you're up against the jam up of form and functions to make it look nice, right? Because you can buy the brake line at Napa. You can buy brake lines at Napa that have new ends on them. I don't know where we used to buy brake line ends from Engel out of Kalamazoo. I don't know who's got those by themselves, or buy Moss line, and or from whomever, having spares, whoever, and then you use your thumb to form it. It's really tedious. It's really, and it never looks good in the end, no matter how much experience you've got. It's really hard to make them look nice. But if there's a question, oh my gosh, and there's no problem in going into your car and sitting in there and pressing on the brake pedal so hard enough that you want to break it. You go, I'm going to break something here, and I'm going to push so hard, I'm going to break something. And I did that once on my wife's GT. She had a Harvest Gold GT, and she was in the party store buying beer, and I was outside waiting. And I was just fooling around, and I pressed as hard as I could on the brake pedal, and the rear hose blew. And immediately I thought, I'm so happy. I'm so happy it blew out here and not in some sort of emergency stop.
All right. Thank you.
John, just to repeat, you're saying that the metal lines rust from the outside and not from the inside?
That's my experience. Well, I've never seen the
No
inside.
guarantee.
I've never seen the inside of one. So yeah, I suppose they do rust from the inside out too. But I don't think I've ever seen a metal line rust through. That's pretty powerful.
Or look great on the outside, but
If they look great on the out, they'll be all right. They'll be okay.
thank you.
Hey, John?
Hey, John, Bill Waterstreet here.
Yeah, Bill,
How you doing, sir?
great.
Hey, what's the best way in an MGB to bleed the rear brakes?
Two people.
Two people.
Well, it's two people. And you take the cylinder farthest away from the master cylinder, which on the B is the left rear, because it's farthest down the line. Open the bleeder, depress the pedal, close the bleeder, let up on the pedal, count out a couple of seconds. Open, down, close, up, couple seconds. Open, down, close, up, wait a couple of seconds. When you get where all the air is out of the line, and the air has to come out of the line. If it doesn't come out of the line, it's going pit, 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 because you can hear the air. If you can't get the air out, then there's a leak someplace in the system. And you go, well, it's not leaking fluid anywhere, but sometimes a leak can be so small that it'll suck air in, but it won't blow fluid out. I don't know what air is smaller molecules. I don't know. Anyway, I know that's the truth. And usually if you just go back through the whole circuit and loosen and retighten every single flare fitting that there is, it takes care of it on all the banjos and stuff like that. And then go to your right-hand side, and you only have to bleed that 3 or 4 times to get it out.
Hey, John, isn't the right-hand side the furthest for the master cylinder?
Not hydraulically.
What? Wow.
Not hydraulically, because the line comes from the master cylinder. There's a left-hand drive car, of course, and goes over to the right-hand side, down the right-hand rail, and goes 3 feet over to the left, but it only goes 1 foot over to the right.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, John,
Yes.
used to be when we would bleed brakes, we would get a Coca-Cola bottle, put about an inch of fluid in it and a tube. And each time you went to a brake to one of the wheels, you'd stick the tube on the bleeder thing, and the bottom of the tube was in your Coca-Cola bottle, and you'd press the pedal until you didn't get any air bubbles. Was that wrong, or is that just different?
That's the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it. But getting a tube on that MGB rear axle is all but on those MGB bleeders that Bill's got. Unless you got the new ones, the 7mm ones, but the original ones, the tube is so tiny, it's just, and it's better to use a clear tube. And then you can see the bubbles coming down the tube. Yeah, that's always in the T-Type and MGA workshop manuals, always has a picture of it. I've got a Lockheed bleeder kit in a little can that says Lockheed on it and a piece of clear tubing in it. Yeah, that is the penultimate way of doing it. Absolutely.
And
So
Judd
that'd
is
be
right.
appropriate on my MGA.
That's great on the MGA. Yep, using a tube.
Thank you.
Tube and washing it bubble out. Absolutely. Yeah, Peter.
What vintage Coca-Cola bottle were you using, Judd?
6.5 ounce,
Okay,
middle 50s.
sounds right.
Back in the day when the glass was that thick and the effervescence twice as much as it is today. There was that lawsuit around 1972 where the woman took the cap off a bottle of Coca-Cola, turning it. It wasn't an unscrew, it wasn't a screw off cap, and she turned the pliers in the Coca-Cola bottle, which had been sitting in the sun for quite some time, blew up, and I think maybe took her eye out. And Coca-Cola responded. I mean, they were sued and they lost. It was a Coca-Cola bottle that blew up, even though everything else was wrong with the picture. They reduced the effervescence. So those 6.5 ounce Coca-Colas, that's all you needed. That was such an intense, bitter, sweet, with all that fizz in it. You can only approximate that with fountain Coca-Cola today.
Rum.
But we're off the subject.
Hey, John, just quick question on the brakes not locking up. What would be a couple of the causes for that if your brakes didn't lock up?
That's a good question.
Slipping brakes.
Yeah, but that's saying the same thing. They're not all going to slip at the same time. I'm trying to talk about tires. If you can lock up your brakes, you don't need better brakes. You need better tires. So some tires grip the ground so well that it's very difficult to lock up the brakes. They would rather turn than stop because the friction between the tire and the roadway is greater than the friction that can be applied there. Beyond that, I guess they are supposed to lock up. If they don't, what's common to all of it? I don't know. You got me.
Well, I'll try it on a gravel road and then try it on a dirt road and see if I see a difference. For
Yeah.
the gravel roads, I don't think tires would support that.
Oh, it'll skid. It'll skid on that. I was just gonna say, I see your car there and I immediately knew that was a Canadian car because we didn't have the
Yeah.
Mark IVs here. And then I see your name, so I know it. So
Thanks, John.
you're welcome.
Hey, John, talk
Yeah.
about speed bleeders.
You talk about them. Somebody just gave me some. I was in Alabama and I had a day-long seminar of electrics. We had about 40 people there, the Southern Alabama British Car Club. And in the mix of all that, somehow we must have talked about bleeders. And someone gave me some of those bleeders later, and they said they work great. I don't get it. I don't understand how they work without leaking. And some people use a Mighty Vac, and put the tube on the bleeder screw, but then air gets around the bleeder screw and comes out. So what do you know about speed bleeders?
Well, I've been using them on all my MGs for about 5 years now, and they come in different sizes. They have a sealer on the threads, so when you put them into the cylinder, they seal the threads, which is where they often leak air when you're trying to bleed, especially with a Mighty Vac. But they have a spring and ball bearing inside. That's why they're more expensive than regular bleeders, because they have the tapered end and all that. But you just crack it open, press the pedal, the fluid comes out, but no air can come back in. So it's a one-person bleeder system, really. And
So you can
they're really
open it,
handy that way.
get in the car, depress the pedal, let up on the pedal, get out of the car and get back underneath the car.
No,
Hang on, my dog's barking. Anyway,
What a hoot, I can't hear it.
the idea is as you press the pedal, fluid comes out, but no air can come back in. So you just keep pumping until you get all the fluid out and
Got
all
it.
all the air out, and then just tighten them up.
Fred, do
Okay.
you open up all four?
No, just one at a time.
Okay.
All right.
But you can do it by yourself. And one word of caution though is you keep talking about these 7mm bleeders on the rear. Make sure that when you get the right ones, because I tried to put a 1/4-inch bleeder, I think a quarter 28 or something, into the 7mm aftermarket cylinder, and of course the thread strip. So you have to get the right bleeders. And I've been going to Summit Racing. They seem to have about the best prices anywhere.
Okay.
And they sell all different kinds for the clutch slave, for the brakes, front and rear, the TC, the TF, the MGA. The
Look,
MGB.
yeah, some of those are British threads. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All
on
right.
the
they've been
MGA,
working
those
great.
speed breakers have to be on the rear part, they have to be longer than the front.
Okay.
Also, you gotta keep that rubber cap on there or they'll leak.
I
Do you
never
take
noticed them leaking with the rubber cap just keeps the dust out.
That's what causes them to go, is the dust and the dirt.
Okay. All right.
And they're great to keep the wife happy.
You don't have to ask for help. Yep. Hey, well, how
I
nice.
don't want help.
So anyway, Fred, that's very kind. Thanks very much for laying that out. I didn't really understand how those work before. I do now, and I understand completely. And I get John Tershak's point too about keeping the cover on them, keep the crap out of them. We used to be, MGBs would come in and they'd been having it serviced down at the ARCO station, and you'd go to bleed the brakes, and the whole bleeder's covered with grease because they thought it was a greaser, put the grease gun on it. So yeah.
So how do you know when the air's out with those speed bleeders?
Again, the idea is you put a tube on it and into a jar, and you just see what's coming out.
Okay.
And then when the air is out, do you put the other bleeder back in, the stock bleeder?
No,
What? You leave it in place.
you
Just
leave the
leave it in.
speed bleeder in place. Yep.
Oh,
They run about $7.90 a piece.
Okay, so when you tighten them, they don't leak anymore then, hopefully.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, they just have the same beveled end on it, so that you just tighten them in just like regular fitting.
but when you're bleeding, you just loosen them a little bit and then they piss out? And then
Yes.
then you tighten it up?
Yes.
Okay,
But
then leave it.
you don't really have to watch it very carefully. You can pump the pedal a bunch of times, then go back and just tighten it up and it's all done.
You're assuming all the air's out. Gotcha. Right?
Yeah, you think after 10 pumps or something, and then of course you get back in the car and you feel it, and if it feels good, what does good mean? Yeah, you stop there. That's cool. That's very nice.
And
Thanks.
keep topping up the master cylinder as you go, you know.
I mean, if you want an inexpensive trial, do your clutch slave cylinder first, and if you're happy with that, then go do your brakes, because you only need one for the clutch, and they usually come in pairs.
Okay.
I just joined this conversation, but I've been using speed bleeders for years, and they really work great. Basically, they're just a one-way valve, is what they are, so that yeah, when you let up in the pedal, nothing comes back. So they work really very well. You leave them on the car, and
Well, if they work on magnets, then they'd have to work on everything else, right?
right, exactly. I have them on B and my C too.
Okay.
Hey, John,
Yes.
what was that piece that he said you put on TD brakes that you had to spot weld or something?
That's the mask. So there's on the micram adjuster, it's a two-part. You've got a mask outside of the twirler on the inside. If you go in the Moss catalog and look for the mask, right underneath that is another part number whose suffix is the letter M.
Okay.
And that's the mask. And it's oh my gosh, it's 1/16 of an inch. I've got a whole box of them. I made a whole bunch of them years ago. We used to, every time we get a bunch of masks, we'd go through and weld it, and someone, Tershak, somebody said spot weld them, but you could, however you got to weld them on, and then you got to grind them so they don't interfere with anything, but they just give you that little extra bump on the adjuster. And those adjusters don't move much. You don't have to have stuff too far out of line, and you can't get those things adjusted. The one gentleman who was on here before said he had to hit his brake master cylinder a couple of times. It's sometimes, you go to tighten up those adjusters and you get them tighter, and then they completely flip and you go back to zero again. That's when you need them. It's when you know that you need them. So
thank you.
I just did a friend of mine's car. He was complaining that his front wheel was getting hot, and he thought it was bearings. So I went over there to a little mini tech session with him, and I was thinking about, back in my mind, it's got to be brakes. This is a car that I sold him about 10 years ago. It was my wife's car. You've seen Jan's car before, John.
Well, yeah,
So
this
anyway,
35 years ago. Yeah.
yes. Well, same car. So anyway, he loves the car, and so we went over there and we tried spinning the wheel. It was almost stuck. So we pulled it all apart, and indeed one of the cylinders was sticking out just a little bit. So we took some vice grips, we took some PB Blaster on there, loosened up the piston, pulled it out, cleaned it all up. Turned out this was an aftermarket cylinder, so it had a lip seal, not the cup seal. So there's no replacement lip seals unless you know of a source for those, because Moss doesn't sell them. Do you have a source for those?
No, I don't.
No. So I mean, you'd think somebody would, but anyway, we just cleaned it up, honed the cylinder, put it back together again, bled it, and everything's fine now. But he needs to, because we reused the old seal, we have to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't start leaking.
And leaking brakes are really pretty easy to find, because there's underneath your wheel arch, there's a line about that wide of where the brake fluid is spun out from the inside of the wheel and it's taking all the paint off.
Okay. John, This is Tom again.
Yes.
Got an interesting thing that a number of years ago that I was doing bleeding and I didn't have anybody to help me. And I started thinking, since the master cylinder shares the clutch slave, why not connect the two? And so what I did was I ran a hose between the nipple of the slave and to the front right wheel, opened them both, got in the car and went and just pumped back and forth, the brake, the clutch, the brake, the clutch, and it would just, the fluid would flow through the whole system like that. And then I tightened it back up. I mean, I was working on the clutch at the time, and the clutch had no needed to be bled, and this fixed it.
How fascinating! Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, never heard of that before, but
I'm just a novice. I'm just a novice when it comes to things like that. But I just started thinking, since they all share the same reservoir. And so I connected the two outside of the reservoir, basically, and just pumped it, and the fluid just would circulate through the clutch and the brakes at the same time.
Yep.
And locked it back up, and it worked.
Yep.
I did that when I had taken everything out of this car that I'm working on right now. When I put it all back together, there was probably still some fluid in the brake lines, but there was no fluid in the clutch. And I did the same thing, and boom, I had both brakes and clutch at the same time.
Got it. Very cool. Speaking of that,
there you go.
I had that mystery picture in the constant contact thing, the thing that was made up with the pipe tees and nipples, everything. A couple of you saw that, I'm sure. I said, who can identify this picture? And that's you have to go back to it unless you've already wiped it off your computer. The picture was, that's a brake master cylinder reservoir for a 75 through 80 MGB made after an underbonnet fire where the plastic reservoir melted. And necessity is the mother of invention. Here's this thing, and it was all held on to the master cylinder with a great big long spring. You could take a little filler cap out the top and pour brake fluid in the top. It was so unusual, but it worked. The bottom line is it worked. Just like Tom's bleeding system works. That's fascinating. We are at 8:30 and we're still talking about brakes, and we can talk about brakes for a while yet, but I've got some, I know I've got some notes over here in the chat section, and I'd like to hit some of those here. If something else comes up with the brakes, break in and holler and we'll do something. So Bill Weekly from Ann Arbor, I'm planning to convert my 69 MGC from the original brake setup with dual remote boosters to the late MGB master cylinder and attached single booster. Any comments or recommendations? That's a wonderful way to do that. Bill, are you on? Bill's waited all this time. He's the first guy up with a question. So on an MGC, it's got a master cylinder, a clutch. It's all Girling. It's got two servos. Unbelievably expensive to have it rebuilt originally. You can take the whole box with the clutch and the brake out of 76 through 80 MGB, put it right in the MGC. It fits right in, but the original air cleaners on the MGC won't fit. You have to do some trickery there to get an air cleaner on that rear carburetor. Other than that, aside from the fact it's not original, it's great. It's got all the function, and the form looks okay. I mean, it does come from another MG. So,
yeah, I've already changed the air cleaner, so that's not going to be in the way.
Okay, yeah, there's something about a 75. 75 is I don't know if it's a different can. I don't know. 75s are different from the 76 through 80s. I don't know what changes. It's the distance from the engine to the master cylinders, and I don't know, is that the engine? Is that the master cylinder? I don't know what it is, but 76 through 80 for sure.
Yeah, they changed the master cylinder. The 75 still had the shuttle and all that stuff in there with the switch. The 76 later put the switch into the master cylinder,
Okay,
the safety switch.
all right, thanks. Thank you. From Jay Chap, Zombie Jamboree by the Kingston Trio. So, all right, so I guess zombies weren't, well, wait, Kingston Trio is the same time as Night of the Living Dead, right? But anyway, here we've got a link to the Zombie Jamboree by the Kingston Trio. Oh boy. Peter McCarthy, break question. I have an interrupted restoration project. I'm attempting to restart. I think you already asked me about this, right? About whether you have to change the brake lines. No, here, let me try and.
Nope, different question.
Yep, I'm trying to read, just give me a second here so I can get this. I got too much stuff in the way. We're attempting to restart. All new brake and clutch cylinders were installed and have been sitting empty for 5 years. I have a bottle of silicone fluid. What problems can I expect using the silicone fluid? How should I proceed on my 72 midget? So you bleed it slowly. Oh my gosh. Silicone fluid's gut experience aerates more quickly than normal brake fluid. So if you're in with somebody who's used to going pump, 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 bleed it, pump, 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 or you're gonna have to wait till the next day to wait for the air to bubble out. So so it's just open one bleeder, do the rears first, do the brakes, do the rears first, and I think that's still the left rear is farthest away from the master cylinder. Open the bleeder, down, close, up, unless you got your easy bleeds, you know, make a case for those. When you're going to bleed the slave cylinder, I have my own technique that it works every time. You use your finger instead of the bleeder. If you're still supple, you can get your left foot on the master cylinder and your right foot on the bleeder in a midget. Chances are you got to use two people now. A long time ago when I could do that. Anyway, take the bleeder all the way out of the slave, all the way out. Use your finger instead of the bleeder. Finger off, pedal down, finger on, pedal up, count out 20 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Count out 20 seconds. Finger off, pedal down, finger on, pedal up. Count out 20 seconds. The 4th, 5th, or 6th time you do this, you hear a great big glug, 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 and fluid will spit out. At that point, instead of using your finger, you can use your finger once more. But at that point, put the bleeder on and then bleed it. You don't have to wait that 20 seconds. So that's my experience in doing that. But everything should work great.
How much?
I lost you. Get your space bar down.
How much do I have to worry about the fact that these new parts have been sitting there in the car dry for 5 years?
I don't think you don't have to worry about it at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
John, but that raises the question of if his car had non-silicon brake fluid in it and there's some residual stuff in the lines. I've just heard, and I don't know, horror stories about the two being incompatible. Can you address the incompatibility?
They are incompatible, absolutely, and they'll turn to jelly when you mix them together. But first of all, he said that he had all new cylinders in there, I think.
And all new lines.
Yeah, so that's not an issue. But with a system, if you want to replace it and put silicone brake fluid in, don't, because it's going to start leaking. But if you wanted to put or put real fluid in where silicone brake fluid is, you've just got to get rid of all the old fluid. And you do that by just repeated bleeding. Just open the bleeder and depress the pedal and close the bleeder up, or use the easy bleeds, and just flush a whole lot of the new brake fluid through there. then it won't be a problem. I worked on a TC in Alexandria, Virginia, and they were trying to bleed the thing. I bought an easy bleed. We only could get the thing up in the air about that much higher than it normally sat. It was real hard to reach, hard to see what I was doing. Finally took the master cylinder out, took the master cylinder apart, and it was this jelly on the inside of it. No wonder it didn't work. So, and that's that combination of silicone and real brake fluid. So, let's see. Mr. Okan, I'm doing a clutch replacement on my X-Bag and was wondering how you know that the pilot bushing should be replaced. Are you still on? Is it Walter, isn't it, Okan? Here, there you are. But I can't hear you yet because you haven't got your space bar depressed yet.
How's this?
There we go. Okay.
Okay, all right.
So either you got an extra first motion shaft or you've got a spigot alignment tool, right?
I have an extra first motion shaft.
Okay. So you're gonna smear some number 2 grease down inside that spigot bush, and you're gonna put the first motion shaft in there, and you're gonna pull out on that first motion shaft as fast and as hard as you can. The grease ought to make a seal, and it ought to be difficult to pull out, and it ought to, I don't know if let me get a drink of water here. It ought to go when you pull it out, meaning that the clearances are really tight. I mean, it really does. It makes that pop sound. If it doesn't do that, you got to replace it. 3 ways to get the old one out. One is to take fill up the hole with grease, take that first motion shaft, put it into the hole, and beat the first motion shaft with a great big hammer, soft hammer if you want to keep if the first motion shaft's still good. And that will shock the grease, and the grease will get underneath the bushing and push the bushing out. The easier way, but then you have to buy a tap for it, is to get a tap and screw that tap into the spigot bush. It'll eventually bottom out in the crank. You keep turning the tap, and it walks the bushing right out. At the end, when you have no other option, you take a piece of broken hacksaw blade in a vice grip. Oh my gosh, and turn on the radio because you're going to listen to a lot of songs, and start sawing and saw a slot in it until it falls out. So in the shop, we always use the first way because it's so fast, but that drawing it out with a tap is pretty good too. I don't know what I can't tell you what the size is of the nose of the X-Pag. Around 5/8 of an inch, but I don't know what the actual size is. So
yeah, I saw another way to do it online.
How's that?
Okay, so you take a nut and bolt, such that the bolt is long enough to hit the bottom of the hole, plus an inch or two, and that the diameter of the nut is just a bit smaller than the inside diameter of the bushing. Then you thread the nut onto the bolt, stick it into the hole so that the shoulder of the nut rests against the back of the bushing. Then you screw down, and then you get a flat-bladed screwdriver to keep the nut from turning as you turn on the bolt, which will walk the bushing out.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. I understand.
Okay.
So it should go like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John.
Hey, thank you. Oh, just a comment about new spigot bushings. The one that you get for the T-type is heavily chamfered. Some of them aren't so heavily chamfered. It always makes sense to go around there with something and just clean it up, because if you get the tiniest lip, it doesn't usually happen with T-types. You get the tiniest lip on there, it'll squeal. Oh my gosh, when it's cold. So the first 2 or 3 gear changes, you put the clutch in. It's like, oh my gosh, doesn't hurt anything, just drives you crazy, and it's embarrassing. So anyway, just be careful about lipping that seal. Okay, let's see. Tom, to everybody, can you recommend on Brake Master cylinders, TRW versus generic? Are the rebuild kits worth buying? So it only depends on the rebuild kits. If there's damage on the underside of the bore of the master cylinder, if there is, that's rusty. It's going to tear up the new seal. That's why you can't use it. Otherwise, yeah, absolutely rebuild it. Absolutely. But the you know, brakes are brakes. I get the more expensive stuff. I mean, I already got done saying that I'm sure no one's selling faulty brake parts. So the generic ones, the unbranded ones, the ones that look like out of a Toyota or something, they'll work fine. Usually, there is a problem with the master cylinder push rod length on some of them. Sometimes you can't get enough throw to throw out the clutch. Sometimes you have to put the original master cylinder push rod in if you can do that. I've heard of that. So let's see, Rob, everybody say, what's likely happening when you get a solid brake pedal on the second pump? Brakes are recently rebuilt, new components, brakes bled twice, nice solid feel in the pedal on the second pump. Do you think the master cylinder is failing? No, I think the brakes are out of adjustment. The rear brakes are out of adjustment. So when you go to adjust the rear brakes on the car, the first thing you do is slacken off the handbrake cable all the way. Then you adjust the adjusters all the way up. If it's an MGA or T-type, you turn the micram adjuster until the rear wheel is locked. On an MGB or a midget, you unscrew the adjuster all the way, grease it, screw it back in until you can't turn it anymore. Don't break it off until the wheel is absolutely locked, and then back it off 1/4 turn at a time until the rear drum just runs free. Then adjust the handbrake. So that's, I'm sure when it feels nice and solid like that, I'm sure it's not the air in the system. It's just getting the brakes rebuilt. And even though you adjusted them when you put it together, now you've used them a couple of times and everything's kind of shifted around and is working differently on the inside. David Basili, how often should we replace brake fluid? As often as you do a complete lubrication, and that we always recommend it at 5,000 miles, 12,000 miles or 5 years. So you can make a case for bleeding the brake fluid every year to get rid of the water that gets trapped in there. How does the water get in there? It just does. It just does. There's a little tiny hole in the cap. You know, you can't block that off. The brakes don't work. Every now and then we'd have somebody come in with brakes or clutch, and they're just working so bizarre. I mean, it's like, what is going on here? And they've taken a bottle cap and used that in place of the original filler cap, which has got a tiny little hole in it, so air can get in to press on the fluid to force the fluid into the system when the system needs fluid. If you don't have that hole and it's sealed off, there's a vacuum in the master cylinder reservoir. So you have to have that. Anyway,
John?
Yes.
How about sealing the cap when the car isn't in use for, let's say, 6 months of the year?
Oh, yeah, if you had that kind of time. I'd never heard of that, never thought of it. I got a real long treatise on winter storage. I'll have to remember to put that on there. Put a piece of masking tape on top of the breather. Yeah, maybe.
And a note in your car.
Yeah, do not start. Do not start. That's whenever you do anything like that, I tell people, pull the plug wire off. Pull pull the plug wire out of the coil. Just do it. You know, like there's a trick when you're changing oil, right? You don't want, you got to spin on oil filter, later model MGB. And when you spin that thing off, there's all this oil that falls out of there and gets on the engine and gets on the rail. And so you want to keep it all nice and clean in there. So you put rags in there, but still it drips. So you take a prick punch or drill a hole in the top of the filter And some of that oil will drain back into the engine then that may not have drained before because you haven't got a vacuum in there. Well, that works great unless you start the engine. And oh boy, that little tiny 1/8-inch hole will really spill out a lot of oil. You know, make a mess out of everything. So I always tell people, anything you do like that, pull the main coil wire off. So you can't start the engine until, you know, it's a reminder, like a rubber band around your wrist kind of thing. So we got the Servio, what would happen, what the cause of the brakes don't lock up. We told that. Let's see. Mr. Chapman here, the T-Type 2024 Moss catalog shows new shoes for all 4 wheels at $70. Anybody have experience with these? Sounds like a pretty good price. I do spirited but not competitive driving. Oh, this is Judd. All right, so I had some pictures up of some brake shoe linings that had cracked. And what was the trade name on those? They made clutches too. Came out of England. No, those linings cracked. We'd see.
Beck?
No, it's a more modern name. Supplier.
Armstrong. Armstrong? No.
Oh, Quentin Hazel?
No, newer, a lot newer than that. But anyway, I've seen bad shoes.
Wild guess, Power Tune, maybe?
Hey, that's not a wild. That's not. Was that Barney? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's me. Power Tune makes everything garbage.
Power Tune. That's that. I just stay away from those shoes. So.
It doesn't say anything about what they are. It just, I mean, that's just what they list in their normal thing. And I didn't know. I'm thinking about putting all new shoes on mine because one of them is got oil on it and is grabbing.
Okay.
So I figured while I'm there, I'll replace all 4. For that price, I'll certainly replace all 4.
I just don't think anybody can sell, well, except for Auto Tune. I don't think anybody can sell stuff that isn't quality. I mean, they're just asking for trouble. So yeah, all 4 wheels for $70. That's too cheap. That's less than they were 50 years ago.
And that's what scared me.
Counting for inflation. But on the other hand, whoever was on before and said he went to have his, just got a price for get his relined and it was $300 or whatever it was. It's like, that's on the other end of the spectrum. So you're going to get those, Judd, and you're going to use them, and you're going to tell us next time or the time after that how they're working out.
Yeah, what I'll probably do is what you said is put the magic marker X's on them and run them for 1,000 miles and then, or maybe 100 miles, and then take them off and see, because I'd heard all kind of people talking about re-arching and making full contact and this, that, and the other. And I like your comment about, friction will do that for you after a little while.
Yep. And if you look at the formula, which I do not have in front of me, it doesn't make any difference how big your brake shoes are.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, you're sweeping the drum and you're making the drum get real hot.
So the larger the shoes, the longer they last. Not the larger the shoe, the better they break. Diameter, yes.
You look at the contact point on disc brakes, little bitty thing.
Yep.
You got a lot of pressure, but it's a little bitty surface area.
Yep.
Compared to a drum brake.
So anyway, so you'll tell us what, it's just getting those hubs on and off. That's a whole day job. Jeez. Oh my gosh.
Hey, John, I'd like to go back to something you said a little earlier about the brake fluid reservoir in the car. I think you said that the cap should have a little hole in it.
Absolutely.
What if it doesn't have that?
Then over a period of use, you're as the shoes wear, as the brake pads wear, fluid goes into the cylinders and the calipers to displace the volume that you've used up in the pads. Therefore, that fluid has to come from the master cylinder reservoir. If it can't come out of the reservoir because it's under vacuum, then the brakes feel really weird. I can't tell you how they feel because I don't remember, but you get in the car and it's like, what is going on here? And it's just I go back to my simplest, cheapest, least difficult step and just make sure that the cap has got a breather in it. So,
Well, you know, I've had a cap from a brake fluid can on my car for quite a while with no holes in it, you know, no hole in it. And is it the same true? Is it true for the clutch reservoir and like an 80 is a separate reservoir? Is that true also? A little hole in the top?
Yep.
And my guess is that the threads are leaking air. So with that bottle cap on there.
Well, that may be true. Yeah. Okay. Because it's been like maybe 70 or 80,000 miles.
Then it's leaking air. It's leaking air around there. Has to, or you wouldn't have brakes. So.
Okay.
David Bandel, what do you think using .5 silicone fluid? We've been using about that. I'm tired of the paint damage under the pedal box. So David Bandel must have an MGA because that's the only one that's got, well, it could be a B. You know, if you, there's form and there's function, right? And going back to that. So the nice thing about the silicone fluid is it does not eat paint. The downside of it is it leaks. If you got an MGA, if you go to an MGA show and you walk down the line and look at all the MGAs with the master cylinders open, some of them have these little rectangular sponges underneath the master cylinder to catch the fluid that drips out the front. If you have your cylinder re-sleeved at White Post, other places, it'll come back and say warranty, no warranty if used with silicone fluid because it leaks. But even though it leaks, makes everything this rubber shiny, it doesn't hurt anything, you know, and it doesn't leak enough, and it ain't gonna leak empty. I mean, it would eventually, I suppose, but you're gonna keep track of that. But the advantage of that fluid is that it doesn't eat paint, and it's a real problem to bleed. It can be a problem to bleed. You just have to bleed a lot more slowly. So, David Vasili, talk about the oh, sorry.
Yeah. One other downside of the silicone is if you need to repaint, apparently it's really difficult to to get all that off of there in order to repaint.
Yes. Thank you. I should include that in my warnings. Thanks.
Actually, real quick, from someone who used to be a paintings chemist. Real thing, you just need to go through and hit it with methyl ethyl ketone, MEK, and that will take out most of it. So when you pull the whole pedal box, clean everything out, make sure that anything below the brake reservoir down where everything may leak, coat the whole thing down with MEK, let it dry, do that twice, and you will eliminate everything. It will also eliminate any potential fish eyes.
Hey, thank you.
So, not a problem.
So methyl ethyl ketone, Senco is gone. The last time I ordered a bunch of chemicals, I ordered from Central Scientific out of Chicago. They used to supply all the high schools and colleges, but they're gone. So can you buy methyl ethyl ketone in a less than a 5-gallon cylinder someplace?
Yeah. So if you go through either company called VWR or Thermo Scientific, they're the two large manufacturers who not manufacturers, chemical suppliers who supply everybody. You can buy it there. There are some paint supply houses, as well as occasionally you'll find a Home Depot who might actually have it, but it's only because they've got other large paint supply houses will do it. And also some of your paint supply houses will actually have it. So, like if you've got the guys who paint the cars, there's usually a paint supply house that supplies them.
Sure.
They might have it.
Okay. All right. So you go to your local body shop and ask them if they, something. Sure.
That'll work.
Okay. Thank you. That's,
Not a problem.
Never heard of that before. Thank you very much.
My father worked at Central Scientific.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I was a plant manager there for a number of years.
Oh my gosh, I still have some stuff downstairs. I've got an induction coil, great big, beautiful, all varnished and, you know, give you a sparkle like that out the top with that oval on the side that says Senco. Yep.
Yeah. And he brought us home stuff like, you know, how kind of electric motor coil, how it works and things like that. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
John?
Yes.
For those who want to stick with the .4 brake fluid, since Castrol doesn't make it anymore, I did some research. I looked up a lot of things online, and Prestone .4 is about the best you can do.
Okay.
You don't want to go to silicone, but that's what we've started using is the Prestone.
Prestone .4. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
You know, the only thing different between .3 and .4 is the temperature on there.
You know, I see those combined. I know they're two different ones. Is the .4 a higher temp? Or is
Yes,
it
it's much higher.
What's that?
It's much higher, but there's no difference really and truly in our cars between a 3 and a 4.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. David Vasili, talk about the significance of properly installing the master cylinder braking light switch on MGBs. I assume we're talking about 68 through 80, the one that controls the brake light switch. Last time I talked to my contact at Moss, he said we've been having nothing but problem with brake light switches, but the ones we have in now, he says, I think they're okay. So anyway, because the wires were falling off and they weren't soldered well enough. Anyway, you screw the switch in until you have 1/2 inch of pedal free play. Tunk, 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 tunk. That's it. And then put the lock nut, the jam nut, it's a 3/24 thread. Just screw that jam nut up and that's it. I always leave them horizontal. I don't like to see them vertical. I like to see them horizontal. The difference between horizontal and vertical is probably a 1/16 or an eighth of an inch of pedal play. So you always make it look nice by leaving it horizontal, but that is critical. So First Track here says re-sleeving the master cylinder. You've got two options, stainless steel or brass. If you go with stainless, make sure you know what grade it is because there are cheap stainless metals that still do rust, even though they're called stainless. So, and Robert Davidson, thank you, our local guy, has video 188, which shows how to rebuild a master cylinder for 75 through 80. I would not have been able to pull that out of the top of my head. Robert, thank you very much. In the video for the Master 252 is far more involved for the 68 through 74. Run away, he says. Well, I don't even have, I had a bracket that I used to take the master cylinder pistons apart, but very difficult to separate carefully. And the 68 through 74, you have to be so cautious. And most of those, the bottom of the bore is rusted away anyway. So just buy a new one for $100.
Yeah, I remember watching that video and it was a mess. And the thing I remember about it most is on your sink where you're rinsing the cylinder out, there is a Pabst Blue Ribbon can on the back.
Okay. That's how long ago it was. Gosh, okay. All right. Michael Cunningham, my 18-year-old daughter was taught in driving school this year that you turn your wheels into the curb when parking. Well, good. I'm glad they are still teaching that. The teacher also found out about my midget and kept asking her questions about it. Yeah, well, in the case of MGs, I don't know. You sure want to turn your wheels into the curb because if it gets going, it's a real nice place to stop. It doesn't move all the way down the street.
And you scared me into changing my brake hoses this year since they're 20 years old.
Yeah, well, you know,
I already have them. I just had them as spares. I said, you know what? I better just put them on. Don't wait for them to fail.
no. Well, I'll just wait till I kind of feel it. Back when I was 19 and I had my TD, something was, I don't remember what was leaking, the master cylinder, one of the wheel cylinders, probably one of the wheel cylinders. I had about 3 or 4 stops between when I could feel there was a problem and I had no brakes. So I'd stop and I'd get out and I'd pour, fill the master cylinder back up with fluid and keep driving. But at this age, with, it's like, no way, dude, you want to do it preemptively, not as a result of a feel. So, yeah,
John?
Tundra midget. Cool.
John?
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever noticed, but those little Jeep vehicles that the postal workers drive, they always turn the wheels into the curb, even in flat country like we have here.
If
There
they
must be some requirement that they're taught, I suppose.
Well, good. I only said that earlier because I imagined that people wouldn't do that anymore. When was the last time you heard about a car being put in park and then coasting away? It just, anyway.
John,
nice.
We were taught that if you're going downhill, you point your wheel to the curb, like if you're parked, you'd point it to the right. But if you're going uphill, then you point your wheel to the left so it'll catch the curb.
Yep.
Of course, where I live, we don't have curbs, so none of that applies. But if you were actually in an urban area where they had curbs, it's different depending on whether you're going uphill or downhill, I think.
It is, absolutely. Yep.
I think that when I learned, yes, it was the same deal with parking uphill or downhill on curbs. I think they used to say that if there is no curb, to turn your wheels to the right, so if the car breaks loose, it'll roll off the road if you don't have a curb.
That was it. The exception was uphill with the curb. If no curb, it'd all be turned towards.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. Donald Bueller, I've got a 52 TD. If you change from the original oil bath air filter to the pancake type air filter, what's the best way to deal with a rubber elbow filter to the valve cover? First of all, I would suggest you don't do that. This is Don Bueller. Don, are you on? I'd suggest you.
Yeah, I'm still on.
Yep, I'd suggest you don't do that because the best air filter in the world is an oil bath air filter. Now, that thing takes about 200 right-hand turns, and 180s. I mean, the air is really rushing through there in a lot of different ways. The car will not run any better with pancake air filters on it. But all that said, there just isn't any way to do that. You could close it off. You could close off that fitting on the valve cover because it's going to spit oil out. There's so much oil up in there. You could, depending on the type of chrome pancake filter you're getting, some of them do have a fitting on the back of them to accept some kind of little plastic fitting or a hose. You'd run the hose down there in that case. But I'd leave that oil bath on there.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. I noticed Judd had a little thing on his TD.
The little breather thing, Judd.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of it up there, John. Because mine came with really crappy little pancake filters. And I think that vent is important to maintain the appropriate whatever inside the crankcase. The TF has a hose from the back of one of the pancakes to the valve cover. And I've always wondered if you couldn't just cobble something like that together. And do you need anything like a restriction or something? I've heard of people saying, well, I cobbled together a PCV valve and I sucked all the oil out of the engine. I don't know if there's any truth there or not, but just sticking a little filter there to keep from spraying oil all over the place and still allowing it to breathe is my solution. It's elegant but ugly.
So the way that air moves when you're at idle, the air is drawn through the oil draft tube into the engine, out of the engine, and into the carburetor. Then once you get going down the road, the air reverses its directions. It's drawn into the car through the air filter and out the oil draft tube. In practical sense, that oil draft tube, which is got the same diameter as your thumb, there's no way that you're going to end up with excess fumes inside the engine. But yeah, it's always better. Probably I said to close it off, but when I said that, I thought I'm going to get hammered on this, and I did. So
yeah. There's an interesting video, and I guess it's still out there, where a guy did a whole lot of study on which way the air flows in or out, and like you said, and then a whole bunch of people said that he was all full of it. So I don't know whether it was right or not.
There's in an MGA magazine that put out by NAMGAR 40 years ago, maybe somebody worked for Ford Motor Company and took an MGA and put it in a wind tunnel. Hey, chained it down and put it in the wind tunnel, and it all had to do with those oval vents up on the side of the cowl. And do those make a difference or not? And I think the takeaway was that if you block those off, more air goes through the radiator. It's just so counterintuitive. But yeah.
The problem with those vents is when you get up to about 25 miles an hour, you get an air pressure cushion in front of the windshield. The faster you go, the farther it extends forward. And at about 25 miles an hour, the pressure starts to blow into those vents rather than out.
Okay, that makes sense. I understand that now. Okay, so your best bet is to close them off.
So John, I have a 63, which has the vent on the very top. And I searched out the original air cleaner that hooks into that vent.
Yeah, for the MGB.
And I put it on there and the car ran awful. So ever since then, I've gone back to the standard air cleaner, and I took a hose and I run out of that and down below, and it discharges out the back of the car.
I'd be interested to figure out why that's happening, because that shouldn't be the case at all. It shouldn't be, and obviously it was. So
well, that hose there's a restrictor within that air cleaner, so it's not the full dimension of that. Right. So it's going from that vent, and there's a restrictor. It goes down when it hits the air cleaner, and I think it's just not getting enough air in the crankcase.
Well, something's going on. I can't make it work in my head why that would be a problem. But anyway, yeah, that hose that goes, the hose goes from TC 1945. There's a hose from the air cleaner to the valve cover. There is on the TD, the TF, all the MGAs and the MGBs. Before they get the Smith's PCV valve, so the ones that are prior to the 1964 18GA engines. So all of those have a hose that goes from the air cleaner to the valve cover. Long run.
John, can I chime in on the breather question?
Yeah.
So back in high school, I had to have air cleaners on my TD. And removing the stock breather tube, I bought this nifty little plug that goes in the stock air or valve cover, which Moss still has. Pretty expensive part. It's just somebody whittled them out on their lathe. But in terms of airflow,
phone was going off.
Pardon me?
No, that was somebody else got it. I'm gonna, Pat, I gotta mute everybody here because we get some background noise, but Pat, unmute yourself again. And then you're on, there we go, okay.
And then the other thing I want to point out is the Bernoulli effect that, you never heard that before? The Bernoulli.
Carburetors work, isn't it?
No.
Bernoulli.
Well,
Bernoulli.
that's in there. Bernoulli.
From a chemist
Bernoulli.
that physically hurts, but yes, Bernoulli. Sorry, I'm off.
So the draft tube, the reason that pipe is so long, it extends down into the airflow underneath the car. And you can demonstrate this next time you're getting a soda. Take the straw out and a little piece of napkin, blow across the open end of the straw, and you create a slight vacuum enough to hold the little piece of napkin on the other end. So that helps to draw out the gases in the crankcase.
Yes.
And it's interesting to note that the importer on the West Coast, that when they would give TDs to the car magazines to road test, they would always remove the oil bath air cleaner because it made a decrease in the acceleration times and the quarter-mile times.
Okay, that makes sense.
It is an excellent air filter, and I will add that one of my TDs still has it and the other one does not.
Okay, so John, if I don't know how to make it any bigger, but I've got the picture up on
Yeah,
my
that's
place.
MG. Yeah.
Now that I'm not fortunate enough to have a TF, but that's an MGA 1622 Mark II. I don't know if the earlier ones, the 1500s, look exactly the same.
They do. They
it looks like nothing but a piece of hose between the back of the #1 carburetor cleaner and the valve cover.
That is correct.
No spiffy valves or restrictions or anything.
No,
I don't know.
it's just a hose. It's just an open hose. It's about 7/16 ID. Yep. That's all it is. And the idea again is that when you're idling, the air comes the fresh air comes into the oil draft tube through the engine, out of the engine into the front air cleaner. And then when you're going down the road faster, and we got the Bernoulli effect, we're sucking air out of the engine and we're putting filtered air into the engine. So to keep the inside of the engine clean and dry, like Pat was talking about. So keep
I don't see why you couldn't do that on a TD and make everything happy if you were using pancake filters.
As long as you can, absolutely you can, and there's no problem doing that at all. It's just that some of the aftermarket filters don't have a good way to hook anything onto the back side of it.
That's why God made drills.
Okay, all right. And the TDs, shortly after they were made, put a restrictor in the fitting on the valve cover to keep the oil from splashing out. They had so much oil in the valve cover that even with that deflector on the underside, there's so much oil that people were complaining that there was oil, there was smoke and oil going through that tube and into the air cleaner. But
on the MGA tube to the air cleaner,
yep.
Inside, should the air filter be outside or inside where that?
Inside the air filter.
Outside.
Inside the air
Hose
filter.
goes to the
inside. I've had it wrong all the time.
Inside of the air filter, so that the air going into the engine is
filtered. Right. Okay. I've had it wrong all this time. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you lose a point. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see. Here we got Jay Kovac. How do you adjust the brake pedal if it's more than half an inch? And if you have a 68 through 80, you correct that by screwing the switch in. If you got a pressure switch, then you got to work with your brake adjustment. So Here we go. Jay's back. He says on an MGA with an 1800 MGB engine with a Moss aluminum head, what needles should be used in the MGB SU carbs? It's a recent purchase. I'm going through some previous poor tuning. So we've got an MGA. We got an aluminum head. Don't know what the compression is. What needles should be used in an MGB SU carburetor? Well, there's lots of SU carburetors. If we've got the earliest ones, the AUD 135s, that don't use, that are not ventilated, then you'd use MB, Mama Bravo needles. If you've got a Smith's PCV valve in there, you'd use a number 5 needle. To be cool, you can put MGA carburetors back on it, find those, that's nice. Then it looks right for the MGA, but it doesn't make any difference anyway, it's probably MB, but I don't believe that Jay is still on because he hasn't revealed himself. So we got Rudy here. You can use an inexpensive brake line plier. That's to shut down. I was talking earlier about squeezing brake lines. Seems creepy to me.
Yeah.
You can buy them. You can buy the brake line pliers, absolutely. And I know people do that. And my guys in the shop did it all the time. It's just every time I saw it, I just went, ugh. It's like shutting down someone's artery or something. I don't know. So, Brad Schwartz, you spoke about brake problems such as pulling to one side and dragging and overheating. Please tell us what can cause sudden brake failure and what to do to reduce the risk. Well, sudden brake failure means that you don't have any brakes and there isn't anything you can do about it except routine maintenance and just making sure everything's done. If you got a T-type and you blow a hose, you've got 0 brakes. You got a handbrake. That ain't going to do anything. You can't pull on that. All the adrenaline in your body can go to your right arm, and you can yank up on the handbrake, but it's only going to slow it down a little bit. You're in real trouble. So a sudden brake failure is a hydraulic failure, and the only way to do that is just stay on top of your brakes. Just make sure they're okay, and make sure those hoses are changed once every 5 years, once every 10 years. David Bandel, what do you recommend replacing metal brake lines with? Plain steel or that copper stuff? It's the copper stuff is not original, doesn't look original. You can use normal lines. You can get stainless steel lines if you want to be really cool and never have to worry about those work just fine. You can use a brake tubing flaring tool on stainless line, just like you can with the other ones. I don't like the copper ones because they're not copper, they're Cupro nickel or something. Can't use copper lines, but I don't like them because they don't look right. That's all. They're perfectly fine to use and they don't rust. So you got that going for you. So other than that, they're all the same.
Yeah, just paint them silver.
Okay. All right. John Lind, I've got a 76 Midget 1500. I'm having trouble with the car since changing the head gasket. Seems like fuel delivery problem since I have compression and spark set from top dead center. This afternoon, I finally got the car started for a short time, like a jet engine, using some spray fluid into the carburetor. And a length of wood pressing on the throttle pedal. That's pretty good. I shut it off and used comparative blowout all the fuel lines from the pump back to the tank and from the tank forward. Those are all cleaned out. Currently have the carb on the bench. Seems to float about 20 millimeters. What should I do? So you got to make sure you're pumping gasoline. That's it. Are you still on, John Lind?
I'm here.
Okay. So when you take the fuel line off the carburetor, and you got a single carb on that, you got a single Stromberg?
Zenith Stromberg.
Yep. So you take the line off the Stromberg and you put it into a can or a bottle and you spin the engine. And you should get
Yep.
fuel.
I got fuel coming out, put it in a container and it shows it's coming through.
And the car ran before.
And it ran before beautifully
So you got
until I blew the head gasket.
You got the spark plug wires on the wrong plugs.
I got spark and
You
it
got-
started up when I put the, when I
excuse me.
sprayed that starter fluid in there. It ran
Okay. Right.
like a
Yeah,
jet
okay.
engine.
All right. So, all right, we got the plug wires. And so we got a problem with a fuel, and we've got a line that goes from the carburetor to the charcoal canister.
Yep, and I blew that out too.
Leave it off. Just leave it off.
Take it on. Okay.
Just leave it. I mean, it should not make one iota of difference whether it's on there or not. But I just talked to a guy the other day that said, yeah, my car runs a whole lot better when I take that line off. I said, well, go chase that problem. So you can put a hose, John, you can take the suction chamber off the carburetor. You haven't had the carburetor apart, you haven't got the piston twirled around wrong or something.
No, I took the float bowl out and
Right.
checked the floats in the valve, and the valve works.
Okay, so the next thing is you take the suction chamber off the spring and the air piston off, put a hose down to that line that you just took off into it, and you should get a column of gasoline out of the main jet that is 2 foot tall. I mean, with the slightest puff. Just-
Okay.
If you blow in there hard, you'll squirt it all the way up to the ceiling. Then the next thing is the gasoline isn't any good.
It's 90, it's got no ethanol in it. I'm buying the expensive
Well,
stuff.
okay, going through the possibilities here.
Yeah, I know.
Or now the next thing is you got some massive air leak. You got a massive air leak and you can't get a mixture that's rich enough to run with
Okay.
gasoline. So how are you going to find that? Because those mix, I don't have to tell you, getting the manifold back on that head is dicey. Do you put the manifold on first, or you put the head on first?
I took the whole thing apart. I put the head on first, and then I
Yeah.
reattached because I was missing bolts on the head.
Okay.
I got new bolts for that and new
And
studs
those-
rather, and new
and
nuts.
all those little banana clamp things and.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got it all.
So if you got an inlet leak, you're getting so much air, you can't vaporize the gasoline. So
Okay.
that's probably the best idea that we've come up with yet for something that's wrong.
So I take it apart and put it back together again.
Pour gasoline in, take the suction chamber off, pour a quarter cup of gasoline into the carburetor, open the throttle disc, and it'll run, along the inlet manifold and into the engine. And then there's some caveats here for sure. Just stay with me here for a minute. What you're looking for is staining down between the inlet manifold and the block, where the gasoline's come along and said, oh, look, there's an air gap there. We're going to go out the air gap rather than go into the engine. Let's say that it does go into the engine. Now you've got so much gas in the engine, you can't even spin it over, maybe. Right. So you take the spark plugs out and you spin it over. Well, now you've got aerosol gasoline blowing out. And if you've got a spark from your spark coil, I mean, the wires are there and one of them sparks at the same time it's ejecting gasoline, you're going to have a fireball. So disconnect the coil so it doesn't spark and put a rag over the spark plug holes and spin it over. And, within very fast as that, you've cleared all the gasoline out of it. So anyway, those are some ideas.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. It's called.
One thing I've heard of is people reverse the input line and the output line, the breather line and the fuel line. If you do that, then it won't run at all. So
Right.
Make sure your fuel is going into the correct inlet and your breather is going to the correct outlet.
Is the
fuel's at the bottom.
inlet is at the bottom and the canister goes to the top.
At the top, bingo.
Right.
Yep. Yep. And if you do that, like Fred said, and eventually you got gasoline dripping out of the carburetor because the fuel bowl overfills and it comes out the jet and it soaks everything after a while. So I bet it's that air. I bet there's something about getting that manifold square on there. Those are just
okay. Yeah.
You know, John, that you mentioned the charcoal canister. A friend of mine, his MGC wouldn't run, and he was about to pull the engine out when he found out the lines from the charcoal canister were plug solid. You pulled them off, the engine started. So, and that's
that
big
blew air through all of this.
That's why I always go back to do the cheapest, easiest, simplest stuff first, you know, just because, oh my gosh, you know, it's just, I have rebuilt engines because there was a dollar problem instead of all the rings and stuff.
Only if you want to.
Now we're down to, I'm gonna hit mute all here just because I get some background noise, sounds like it. Janet and Reg, concerning an MGA tachometer cable replacement. I installed a new cable on my MGA and somehow it shortened up and it was too short to go into the tach. Did I not seat the cable properly into the engine, or it was too short to start with?
Well, John, I measured the old cable, the old cable, and there was, that much out of one end and that much out of the other. So I figured that would be what it should be. And I put them in, tried to run the car, of course, the tach wouldn't turn over. So I pulled the cable off there and it was just flush with that nut.
So there's a washer in there that's supposed to keep it from moving down inside the outer sheath. There's supposed to be a washer on there. So what you can do, this is cheating, it's easy. You pull the cable all the way out, the inner cable all the way out, put it in the vise, put a pair of vice grips on it and pull it and make it a quarter or half an inch longer. It's just a guitar spring, it'll pull.
Yep.
But you're pulling it against a bench, you're pulling it against something you've laid out there, so you don't pull it too much. Because then all of a sudden you got to cut the end of it off, and then you cut the end of it off and it'll splay and it won't fit in, and then you got to buy another cable anyway. But you can stretch those.
Okay.
And you can also take a look and see if it's it is fixed, it is held in place by a washer up at the top end, which begs the question then, where's that washer? I don't know. Anyway, you can.
I didn't see the washer on any schematic, and the Moss in there.
Yeah, that's the pictures are so big that they all have a little white nylon washer there at the top to keep it from sinking down inside the cable.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Well, I'll look around. Thanks very much.
All right. We've got a comment here about speed bleeders. Absolutely. Francis Byrne, could you review removing and reinstalling wire wheels with Octagon knockoffs? How tight should the wheels be? If you got that little, are you still on, Francis? If you got the little tiny wrench and a lead hammer, I mean, you're hitting it, and once it stops turning, more than just that much each time you hit it. You probably can't even see it, my hand turning here, but you're hitting it as hard as you can, and so just moving that much, stop there. That's plenty tight. They tighten in the direction of wheel rotation, and they tighten or loosen once they get on the car. It's unbelievable. But you don't have to get them too tight. You smack them. If you're using the Rob Clark, the Clark and Clark long wrench, you just get it until until it pops off, till the wrench starts to bend. Or it's an octagon spinner, until it pops off. There's some other spinners out there too. I've got a new video out with a really cool spinner wrench. Oh my gosh, it looks like you can get the spinners it's got like a way too tight. It's got like a 4-foot lever on it. Like, whoa, that's really tight. But so you've got what year do you have, Francis?
It's 69 MGB.
Oh, okay, all right. So yeah, you have just the little wrench that comes.
You know what? I've got the ginormous wrench that's signed by John Twist.
Yes. Yep. So you put that on and you tighten it up until it pops off.
Okay. Yeah, because when I took it off, it was nasty. I had to like beat on the thing for a long time.
Yeah.
So maybe it tightened up from the car moving.
That, and there's also that friction in the threads, and if you put it back together with some anti-seize or some grease, I like anti-seize there because it's silver and it doesn't. I mean, it'll still attract dirt, but at least it's not red to start with. So
cool, thanks.
You're welcome. Rudy says Napa now has a brake line, steel brake line. It's very malleable. You can take your time and put the bends right where you need them. Okay. Nice. And Crystal Johnson says, for those who want to replace pre-bent brake line kit, there's a place already called Classic Tube, classictube.com, and they have your brake lines already bent. So they put them in a box. They come through FedEx or UPS. They go into your car. At least it's a form. You're still going to have to tweak it, but I didn't realize that those were there. Crystal, are you still on?
Yep, I'm on.
All right. Are you going to be in Katy? Do I get to meet you?
Yep, I've already got reservations in. I'm working on getting my car ready to go now.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you down there.
I was hoping to catch you at the special sessions there.
Absolutely. Okay, great.
All right.
And the pre-bent brake lines might be very expensive to ship because they go in an oversized box.
Hey, yep. Bill Henley, the only electrical thing not working on my 72 MGB is the brake pressure failure light switch on the dash. It doesn't light when tested, but if I jump the wires at the end in the engine compartment, it will light. I know it's not an important thing, but how can I make it work? So are you still on, Bill Henley? There's a white wire with a black tracer that goes down to the switch, and then some of those have got a wraparound on them, a little piece of metal wire that's wrapped in the switch, and then the other wire comes back up. God, I'd have to look on a 72 wiring diagram to see. They changed the way they do it there a couple of times, but whoever knows Bill and can get in touch with him, tell him to call me and I'll take a look.
I'm here, John.
Oh, all right, there you go. There's a couple different ways that they did that, and there's it's some of it it seems counterintuitive, but some of them seem to ground out in the brake failure switch itself. They ground out there. Now, how can they ground out if that piston has got two O-rings on it and it's all in brake fluid and it's shuttling back and forth, but it doesn't take a lot of ground to light that little light. But call me tomorrow and let me look up a 72. I'll try to remember to do that when the session's over tonight. And I'll take a look at a 72 wiring diagram and see if I can tell you a little bit more. But you've got the choice of the switch on the end. I think the shuttles are all the same. You've got the choice of the switch on the end, and some of the switches are the 2-pin ones. You look up inside there and there's a wire wrapped around inside there that jumps one wire to the other. So.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, John.
All right, you're welcome. David Basili, I learned something new tonight. Hey, good, about brake bleeding. Oh, the fact that the left rear is the farthest from the master cylinder. All right. Can you please leave your phone number? Yes, Marty probably has it up on there, but it's on my website. Yep, Marty answered it right away, always. I tried last Friday and the message said the number was not set up. 3076737. Try it again, Lawrence. Let's see, David Seed, everybody, using low air pressure from the spare tire or compressor, a Gunson Easy Bleed brake and clutch hydraulic bleeding kit, eBay, UK, allows you to pressure bleed the system, no wife needed. So yes, you can bleed the brakes using a Mighty Vac. If you put some Teflon tape on the thread so it doesn't leak, you can squeeze it, you can suck the fluid out, you can pressure bleed the system. I never like pressure bleeders because I've had the tops blow off the master cylinders under pressure, and then brake fluid goes everywhere. And even though you clean it up, it went someplace you didn't notice. I'm not keen on pressure bleeders, but pressure bleeders are a real fast, efficient way to do it. Absolutely. And Pat Garrity reminds us that aluminum hydraulic parts should never be honed, okay, because it changes the diameter. I think it's the diameter that changes. It may be the surface in there. We used to hone
John,
it. Yes.
I had an engineer tell me that properly constructed aluminum brake cylinders have a layer of hardening that's very thin.
Okay.
So you would hone right through that. Plus, you're not supposed to use abrasives on aluminum. It just loads up the stone, so you're going to scratch the hell out of it. So if they're bad enough, they need to be honed, they need to be replaced, and they're cheap nowadays.
They are cheap. And
don't go cheap
interestingly,
with your life.
Interestingly, on the back side of the piston in the front, this is T-type or MGA, probably T-type, there is a relief cut into the inside, a hole cut on the back side of the piston. Now, on one cylinder, it doesn't make any difference because the brake fluid bubbles, the bubbles rise. But the other side, you've got a trapped brake bubble. Now, on the new cylinders, that was news from Glenn. What he called me all irate one day. I was like, who would make these? Who would make these with a little hole drilled in them to trap the air? But anyway, Pat's got the point there. So yeah. And Brad Schwartz says, please comment on using red rubber grease when rebuilding brake components. I always use Silglide. From Napa. It works great. It seems to be compatible with everything. I'm sure it's not, but SILGLYDE. But some kind of rubber grease when you're rebuilding brake things. Yes, we used to rebuild a lot of brake stuff. You always use either brake fluid or Silglide or the fluid, the goo that's supplied by the people selling the parts. Most of the kits come through without the goo anymore.
Oh,
John?
Yes.
I wanted to comment before we got too far away from Pat Garrity's comment on that aluminum cylinder lining.
Yeah.
Aluminum work hardens when you're machining it. Probably what's happening when you hone it, then you remove that work hardened surface.
Okay. All right.
Then you're back to porous aluminum again.
Okay. All right. That makes because when he said that, I thought, how in the hell do you harden the inside of a cylinder? But work hardening, yes, got it. That makes lots of sense. Thank you.
You bet.
We've talked about .3 and .5. And Pat Garrity says that you can use denatured alcohol, which is for a brake flush. Denatured alcohol is ethyl alcohol, the kind you drink and the kind that's in our gasoline, but it's been splashed with some methyl alcohol or some other kind of alcohol to make it not natural, and so you don't drink it. Okay, so you can use the denatured alcohol for cleaning it out. Okay, Ryan, everybody. The speedo on my Bug-Eye doesn't return to 0 at a stop. Any ideas on how to repair or what the cause might be? If by tapping it, you get it to fall back down, then the guts on the inside need a drop of oil.
Okay.
Do that yourself, or do you send it away? If you send it away, they're going to rebuild it. It's going to be $200, right? And you can send it to British Speedo Repair. They took over for Neisinger. They're in New York, or MoMA in Albuquerque, or Morris
Valley.
West Valley in there, someplace in California. Or if you're brave and you're clean, you can take the Speedo partway apart. It depends. Sometimes the trip odo on the bottom just doesn't let you get the guts out. God knows how they put it in to begin with. And you take the finest oil you can find, sewing machine oil, and put that on a toothpick and put that on the axle where you can operate it yourself and find the little points, and might be fun. If you screw it up, you can send it away, have it fixed. The other thing that the Speedo guys will tell you is that if there's oil getting screwed up the cable, it'll screw into the inside of the back of the Speedo and it'll gum it up because all of a sudden there's too much grease back there. So it just depends. So anyway, but it's all possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And here we got some stuff from Marty. So Pat Garrity would call me out on me saying it doesn't make any difference how much surface area you have for braking, and for the brakes to work correctly until you take heat into consideration and the dissipation of the heat. So the bigger the brakes, the longer they last and the faster they can dissipate the heat. So, and so David Randall, I answered that about the .5, and we've got more comments back here. Please read the safety data sheet before using methyl ethyl ketone. Okay, so it's known to the state of California to cause cancer and reproductive harm. That's implicit. Pat Garrity wants to get in touch with Judd. You guys can email me back and forth, unless you didn't have a email addresses. You can email me. I'll get you guys in touch with each other.
I sent him an email address, Tom. John, thank you.
Okay. Regarding John Lind, I'm wondering if the exhaust is slightly clogged. This is the 1500 midget that wouldn't start. Maybe there's a rag in the downpipe. Then it would start and fail to continue to run. In that case, it would start and fail and it wouldn't run with the like the jet engine using the carb cleaner. So, but that's a good idea. Okay, so I'm just going through these. There's people who've made comments. Everybody else can go through there. So here we are at the end, and oh my God, it's 9:45. So we've gone way over what we usually do. Oh my gosh. So anyway, Marty, what are our counts for tonight? Marty's still on. Maybe Marty had to go to bed.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Spent way too many hours doing taxes today, but I am still here. I saw 174, 175
Okay.
as our top.
All
And
right.
also I did a quick count and we're at Zoom number 80 or 81. So that's worth celebrating.
Oh, 80 or 81, depends on how you count them. Okay.
I have to check which ones were canceled, postponed, but it's somewhere around there.
Around 80, around 80. All right, well, we'll take 80, just, and I've done some private Zooms too for, the Philadelphia MG Club. We did a closed in Zoom, but I think then I went ahead and put it up on YouTube later. So
And we thank you for that.
okay, do we count that or not? It's like, I don't know, what do you count? Count as many as you can. Anyway, takeaways tonight: cheapest, easiest, simplest, fastest. Always do that stuff first, just in case. Taking the fuel lines, taking the evaporator lines off the carburetors, just to see how it runs, just to make sure that that's not the problem. When you got a bad running problem. And brakes are the most important part of the car. We did a lot of stuff on brakes today. Learned about methyl ethyl ketone to take the silicone off. All painters know that, but nobody else in the world seems to, I guess. Now I do. I think the carburetor cleaner I use, I think it's got toluene and methyl ethyl ketone in it. So that would work. That must be why when we painted engines, after washing them down, the paint adhered so well. So anyway, don't forget to go on the website and hit the PayPal button. I was supposed to say that a couple of times, but we were so engaged in conversation that it escaped me. So I do truly appreciate your largesse and the contributions that you make. So I've got my poster behind me, my Everything Octagonal poster, the MG poster. We used to do a poster like that every year at the summer party. Some were really good, some weren't. I like this one because that's my only poster. I did all the engineering drawings with ink on vellum, back in the day. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for being on. When's our next one? I don't even have a calendar. I'm going to be in Texas next week, and then looks like the 29th. Probably the 29th, because the weekend after that, I'm going to be in Minneapolis. So I would encourage everybody to go to Katy, Texas, if you can. Everybody apply for a job at Glenn's MG Service in St. Petersburg. He's looking for somebody. Come to the seminar at Quality Coaches in Minneapolis, the 4th and 5th of May. We'll be rebuilding the gearbox and talking about pulling cars out of a barn and making them runnable again. So that's always a fun weekend in Minneapolis. Anyway, and then after that, I don't know what happens. That's way off in the future. So I'm just going to call it tonight and say I think we'll have another Zoom on the 29th. I think I'll be here the 29th of April. So until then, thank you very much. When was that day? Drive your MGA day. I didn't write that down.
May 4th.
May the 4th, I'll be driving from Gowinsville to Tennessee.
Is that half a mile or is that 100 miles?
About 250.
Oh my gosh.
The straight line is probably about 150, but it's through the mountains.
My MGA, I've had it in storage all winter, and I looked at the left front wheel, and there's brake fluid on the tire and on the wheel.
Oh,
I know
that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing. I looked in the master cylinder and it was down quite a lot, and I put fluid back in it so I can still move it around the shop. But I got, at least I got kits. I got a whole set of kits. If you're going to do one, you're going to do them all. Put hoses on it. Needs tires. Oh my gosh! And I still have my huge midget project that I'm still struggling with. So anyway,
you just got to stop putting it up for the winter. It just doesn't get that cold.
It's the salt.
What do
are you gonna talk about on our next meeting, John?
Bringing cars out of storage. That's what I was thinking about today, but I'm up for suggestions, so.
Oh, okay. No, I heard you say that, but I thought that's what you were doing down there in Tennessee or wherever you were.
Texas, I'm gonna be
Texas.
talking about that. Yep, and then we'll be talking about it up in Minneapolis. So, I mean, there's two different ways to pull cars out of storage. One is because it's been in since last October, and the other one is because when you left it at your dad's house, when you graduated from high school, and now your dad's passed away or he's in the old folks home, and you got the car back, and it's like, that was 38 years ago, and it ran when parked. Now what do I do? You know, what's a reasonable approach to take? So
You got to kill the 10th generation of mice.
You got to do the brakes.
Rodents.
yeah, all of that and more. Yeah. All right. Hey, it's been real.
Good night, John. Great meeting.
Thank you, John. Good night. We'll catch you in a
Night,
couple
y'all.
weeks.
Thanks, John. We'll see you in Texas.
All right.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Barney.
Thanks, John.
Barney, you going to Texas?
What's in?
The NAMGBR, the MGB meet in Katy, Texas, next week, Monday through Thursday.
Well, I'd have to hustle. We're in Illinois right now, heading
Oh.
north, but
Yeah. Okay. You
we're
going
going to
to?
go to the NAMGAR, going to Oregon.
Yeah, I gotta fly out there. I can't. I'm flying to Katy, Texas too. I can't drive. I'm still debating whether to drive to Minneapolis. I haven't driven to Minneapolis for a long time. It's one day in the car. It was like going to Philadelphia last weekend. You know, it's 2 days going out there. Well, it's only one day, but I broke it in half. Going out, so I would arrive fresh. And but on the way home, it was one bonsai run. It was about a 12-hour run. Unless you run into returning eclipse traffic and construction traffic, which I did. So it was a 14 hours in the car driving home. Oh my gosh.
I ran into all that too. Hey, if you can talk me into going Katy, Texas, maybe it's a good excuse to go to Starbucks.
Go where? You let off just when you go to what? Starbucks, would you say, Barney?
No, Starbase to see the rockets
Oh,
down in Brownsville.
all right. Cool.
John, I thought
Yes.
you might find this interesting. I waited till the end to show you. My wife, for a number of years, was doing a show first for a local station in London and now on YouTube. She goes to different comic conventions and interviews people there, including all the kids who go. Here is one she did in 2016 with George Romero.
Oh, all right.
So she actually interviewed him twice. I think that one was in Toronto, and they talked about the Blue Jays for a while. And because you'd mentioned at the beginning, from my last trip to the other London.
All right. Okay. Well, I brought my hat tonight, but we're recycling hats now. So this is my helmet. This is the Riot helmet. This is a real honest to goodness Riot helmet that belonged to my late son, who was a member of Michigan State Police. So, and for whatever reason, they didn't want it back. But anyway.
Very cool.
All right. Okay, what is it? 9:54. I think this is our longest seminar. I think so.
That's how important brakes are.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Doc Rosevear, see you later.
Thanks, John.
Take care.
Good night, John.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Great questions.